what's up? Welcome back to yet another fun, delicious week here at My Yummy Spatula. I'm your host RJ and welcome to 2023. Before we actually get started with today's video, Happy New Year. I hope everybody's had a wonderful start to 2023. This is officially our first recipe for this new year. No pressure, I guess. But I have a feeling you're absolutely gonna love this one. So today we're making some amazing cinnamon rolls, but these are no regular cinnamon rolls, okay? These are the fluffiest, the softest, and the most delicious cinnamon rolls ever. And I know a lot of recipes say that, but you're just gonna have to take my word for it and make it yourself, and then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So we're making some cinnamon rolls today. It's gonna be absolutely delicious. Let's actually get started. Now, before we get to making our main dough, we're gonna make something called tanzong. So this particular recipe, it's based off a Japanese milk bread style bread. Now, if you've ever made Japanese milk bread before or heard of it, you might know that it uses something called tanzong. Now, tanzong is kind of like a pre-ferment, except it's not really for fermentation, it's more to tenderize the bread, if that makes sense. So tanzong is basically a paste made out of water and flour. They're cooked together to a sort of pasty consistency, and this helps to act like a conditioner for your dough because it makes the bread a lot softer, a lot fluffier, hence the softest cinnamon rolls you'll ever eat. And it also helps to make your bread rise more because it sort of strengthens our gluten strands, which means it can hold more fermentation and they can rise more. I'll explain that process a little bit when we actually get to making our dough. You can make this on the same day, completely fine. Or if you want to save some time, you can make this a night before or 2 days in advance and have that ready to go so that you don't have to sort of do this process on the same day as you're making your bread. Totally up to you. It's super easy, super straightforward. Let's actually get started. Okay, let's get our tanzong going. So here I have a small pot, and to this I'm gonna just add some room temp water, and we've got our baker's flour or high protein flour. So I'm gonna add that in as well. And we're gonna give that a quick whisk just so there are no lumps, but then I am gonna switch to a spatula when I'm cooking it on the heat. Okay, beautiful. So this looks good. So we're going to put this on the stove top and we're going to cook this to like a gelatinous base, basically. That's what we're looking for. I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, and while we're cooking this, we're just going to keep stirring this just so it doesn't stick to the bottom and burn. As you can see, it's starting to thicken. It's getting more of a pasty consistency, and I can see a few boils, which is perfect, which means that the starch in the flour is beginning to cook. So you see it's got this pasty consistency, which is perfect. I'm going to take this off the heat now. Let's transfer this to a bowl. You can see it's really nice and thick. Just put a layer of cling wrap on the surface. So I'm going to put this in the fridge for half an hour to let it cool down, and then we're going to make our main dough. Our tanzong has cooled down now. It's at room temperature, and that's exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and get started with our main dough. Now, like any other bread recipe, this recipe is also going to require a little bit of kneading. So if you want, you can do this by hand. Full disclosure, your arms are going to be incredibly sore and they might just fall off afterwards, but that's a risk you're going to have to take. Or if you're like me, get yourself a handy stand mixer. It's honestly such a lifesaver, especially if you're somebody who bakes very often or you just make breads a lot. This is going to be a godsend gift to you. So highly recommend investing in a stand mixer if you don't already have one. Anyway, so this is what I'm using today. So got my bowl here and I've got my milk. Now because it's it's very hot here in Australia. So I'm using all my ingredients from the fridge because as my dough is mixing, it's going to get a lot warmer, and because the environment is a lot warmer as well, it's going to heat up my dough really fast. And I don't want that because I don't want my yeast to start fermenting in the bowl while my dough is still mixing. So that's why I'm using cold ingredients. If you're in a slightly colder environment, you might want to use room temp ingredients. If you're in minus temperature, you might want to use your ingredients at 27 degrees Celsius. So depending on where you are, you have to adjust the temperature of your raw ingredients to suit yourself. Okay, so I've got my milk in. To this I'm going to add yeast. Now I'm using fresh yeast, but you can use dry yeast or instant dry yeast as well, and that is fine. If you want to use dry yeast, you just divide the amount of fresh yeast by 2.5. So for example, I'm using 13 grams of fresh yeast here. So if you divide that by 2.5, that's 5 grams of instant dry yeast or the active dry yeast that you get in a packet. So that's the ratio that you want. So milk in, yeast in, and to this I'm going to add my caster sugar, and then we're going to plonk in our tanzong that we made earlier. Put that in. And then I'm going to add in my flour. So I've got my baker's flour, which is high protein flour, and milk powder all in the same bowl. Milk powder is a good addition to this dough because it helps to add slight fattiness to the dough without actually adding liquid as you would with milk. So that's why we add a little bit of milk powder in there. And lastly, I'm just going to put in my salt. Salt is very important when you make bread. It's not to add saltiness, it's because it's mostly to control the fermentation. So it sort of creates a boundary within which your bread can rise. Because if you don't add any salt, the yeast is going to go wild and crazy. It's going to be it's like a kid on sugar rush, and it's just going to go crazy. So adding that salt helps to keep it in check a little bit, kind of like a leash on your sugar high kid. It's like you can go this far, but that's the maximum you can go. So that's what the role of salt in bread making actually is. Okay, so I've got all my ingredients in except my butter, which I'm gonna add once my dough is nearly developed, because butter or fat in general, it sort of slows down the gluten development process. So that's why we don't wanna add it too early. Okay, so we've got all of that in, and I've got a hook attachment, and I'm gonna put that on speed 1 to let that combine a little bit, and then we're gonna increase the speed to help develop the dough. Now with any bread making, it's incredibly important to develop your dough. And when I mean develop my dough, it means to develop the gluten in your dough. Gluten is the protein that sort of supports your entire bread making process. It gives your bread structure, and as well as it helps support fermentation. Now, gluten normally is not present. Gluten forms when flour is mixed with water or any kind of liquid, so in our case, milk. So when the flour and water or milk, they come in contact, gluten starts to form. And as we keep kneading it and sort of working our dough, this gluten gets stronger and stronger and stronger until it forms a strong enough bond that when you stretch your dough thin enough, it does not break. So this is why developing your dough is super important. But there's also another aspect to bread making, and that is fermentation. So when yeast starts to do its thing, it starts to release a lot of air, carbon dioxide, and it starts to expand. But you need to have a space for these air bubbles to get trapped so that your bread actually rises in the oven or while proofing. So it's between these gluten strands. So when yeast starts to do its thing and release carbon dioxide and begins to expand, it's between these gluten strands that the air starts to get trapped, and then it starts to expand. So if you don't have the gluten, there's no space for the air to get trapped, and therefore you don't get the same rise in your bread, nor do you get the same structure because your dough is really weak. Which is why it's super important to develop your dough, not only for structure, but also to get a nice rise and to support fermentation. This was a very quick crash course on bread making, but if you want to learn more about gluten and fermentation, I have a podcast episode that you can listen to. I will leave a link in my description bio so you can check that out to understand bread making a little bit better. Anyway, back to this. So, got my hook attachment here. I'm going to put that on. I'm going to put that on speed 1 first, and then increase the speed 2. So as you can see, everything is nicely combined. It looks very scruffy right now, but that's completely fine. I'm going to turn this up to speed 2 and let my dough develop for a good 10 to 15 minutes. And just like any other bread, make sure you scrape down the sides. So as you can see, the dough is no longer sticking to the sides of the bowl. It's all sort of come together in this one ball. My dough has been kneading for roughly 5 minutes at this point. So I'm going to start adding my butter now and let that mix into the dough and then fully develop it. So get your soft room temp butter here and we're going to start adding that in. Okay, my dough has been developing for 15 minutes at this point now, 15 to 18 actually, and it is ready to go. So there are a couple of different things we want to look for. First of all, it's not really sticking to my hands anymore. So that's a really good sign that my dough is developed enough. And secondly, I like to do these slap and folds. It helps to smoothen out the dough. And secondly, you want to look for a window pane consistency. So just stretch out your dough. And you see it stretches out thin like a window, and that's what you're looking for. That's a window pane consistency. So I'm just going to smoothen it out again. Do a couple of slap and folds. You can use a metal scraper to help scrape the dough. We're just going to get the dough a bit smooth on top, and then I'm just sort of tightening it like that to get a nice smooth top. There you go. So now that our dough is ready, we're going to do something called the bulk fermentation. Now it's called bulk fermentation because we're going to proof the entire bulk of the dough together. Every bread making, there's two different stages of fermentation. There's the bulk fermentation, and then we're going to shape it and ferment it or proof it a second time. So I've got a bowl here. I'm just going to grab our dough, put it inside, and then we're going to cover this with a cling wrap so that the dough doesn't dry out. And I always like to write the time so that I know roughly how long I'm going to ferment it for. So right now it's 1:15 in the afternoon. I'm going to ferment this for roughly an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's actually really warm today, so I think an hour and a half should be good. You want to ferment it until it doubles in size. That's what you're looking for. So if it's slightly colder, it will take longer. If it's hotter, it'll be a lot faster. You want to look at the size of the dough versus sticking to the time, if that makes sense. I'm going to leave this on the countertop, and then we're going to come back and check on this once it's ready. Our bread is proofing. It's been roughly an hour and a half, and you can see it looks really nice and puffed up. It's still a few more minutes to go, so I'm going to let this sit for another 15-20 minutes or so, and then it should be good to go, and then we're ready to shape it. Meanwhile, while that is still doing its thing, let's prepare our cinnamon butter. Okay, cinnamon butter, super easy and straightforward. I've got my softened room temp butter here. If you don't have softened room temp butter, just stick your butter in the microwave 10 to 15 seconds and you've got yourself softened room temp butter. To this, let's add some dark brown sugar, and I've got a little bit of salt in there as well. Salt is just one of those ingredients that really is great in baking because it doesn't make anything salty unless you add heaps of it. It just helps to really bring out a balance between flavors because salt is a flavor enhancer slash balancer. I don't think that's a term, but that's what it does. I do understand and I do realize that this is a tiny bowl that I'm using, and the spatula might be a little bit too big for it, but you know what, I'm committed to it now, so I'm just gonna go for it. Anyway, so I'm just trying to get this to combine and make sure there are no streaks of butter or any big chunks of sugar, as dark brown sugar can be a little lumpy. And once that's all done, we're gonna add in our cinnamon powder. Now, I don't know what your thoughts on cinnamon desserts are, but I'm of this old school train of thought that cinnamon desserts should well taste cinnamony. So I like to add a good bit in there, but if you're somebody who's not a fan, maybe don't make cinnamon rolls then. Yeah, you can reduce them out a little bit. Okay, and lastly what I'm gonna add is I'm gonna grate in a little bit of nutmeg, not too much. It just helps to round off the flavors a little bit. So I'm just grating some fresh nutmeg in there. Okay, so everything is mixed in. That's it. Look at that beautiful cinnamon butter ready to go. So cinnamon butter is ready. Let's check on our dough real quick, and as you can see, it has doubled in size. It's looking really, really poofy, so we are ready to shape this. This is my favorite bit. Okay, let's get our dough out and onto our fluff surface here. So I'm gonna just flip this so that we have the smooth side on the top. And then we're gonna sort of tuck it in a little bit. Like that. Roll this out. So we're gonna roll this to a rectangle of roughly 36 by 16 centimeter. And while you're rolling it, just make sure you keep moving it. It's a little bit hot in here, so I might just get a little bit of extra flour and just sort of spritz that just so my dough doesn't stick. That looks good. Okay, I'm gonna roll this out. You want the same thickness all over. Okay, so this is now 24 by 38. You know what? It's okay if we go a little bit over 16. We'll just have slightly fatter rolls. But you know what? Nobody's complaining about that. Okay, this is good. We're gonna start spreading our cinnamon butter. So let's get this and just place a few dollops every here and there, and then we're gonna spread it. Grab a small palette knife, and you want to spread this to the very edge. Beautiful. So that's good. Now, this particular Swiss roll, we're not going to roll it up and then cut it. I find that very messy. So instead, we're going to cut it in individual strips and then roll it individually. A lot cleaner, a lot more pure. So I'm going to mark 4 centimeter strips on the longer side, and then we're going to roll them. I've got my square baking tin here lined with some parchment paper, so this is where I'm going to roll and put my cinnamon rolls on to proof for a second time. Put it down here, and then we'll start rolling. So just like with any other cinnamon roll, you see we've got a flat one. But you know what, that's it. Lift it up and put it inside your pan. And there you go, all our cinnamon rolls are nicely shaped. If you notice, all my ends of my roll, they're all inwards, they're not outside. It's because it helps to keep them a lot sort of in shape and not lose their shape while they're proofing or baking. Okay, so this is ready to go, and we're gonna proof this a second time and then break it. So we need to let this proof a second time before we're ready to bake it. But because we've shaped them and we've sort of divided the entire dough into smaller pieces, we don't really need to proof them for as long as 1.5 to 2 hours as we did with bulk fermentation. So this one is roughly going to take roughly 30 to 45 minutes depending on how hot your climate is. It's pretty hot here, so I reckon this is going to be ready in probably 30 to 40 minutes. I'm just going to keep an eye on them, but basically you want them to grow to roughly about 40% in their size. So if I press this right now, very springy. As I press my finger, they instantly bounce back. That means they're not proofed and they have more life to give and they can grow a little bit more. So that's why we proof it a second time. So you can just cover this with cling wrap and leave it at room temperature for roughly 30 to 45 minutes, depending on how hot your climate is. Or if you're crafty like me, I've got myself a makeshift proofing apparatus, if you want to call it. So this is just a shoe box that I've cut the top and bottom off, because then I can sort of close it like that, and I just place it on top of whatever I'm proofing. Usually it's a tray of croissant or this or whatever, and then cover it with cling wrap. The reason being is that because it has these sides, it doesn't touch the tray. So if I were to cover this entire tray with cling wrap, by the time my buns they rise to the top, they'll stick to the cling wrap, and sometimes you can end up damaging your product. But if you do it this way, where there's a little bit of height, so there's no chance that the cling wrap is ever going to stick to it unless you overproof your dough. This just helps so that nothing sticks to your cling wrap. So that's a handy trick if you want to do it. These are great if you're making croissant, to be honest, because they never stick. There you go. That's my handy proofing apparatus ready to go. I like it because it's cling wrap, so I can see what's happening with the bread. Anyway, I'm gonna let this sit on my countertop for roughly 30 minutes. I'm gonna check out the 30 minutes, show you what it should look like, and then we'll bake them. Okay, let's have a look. Our cinnamon rolls have been proofing for roughly 30 minutes. As you can see, they look really nice and puffy. They've gotten a lot bigger. This one a bit more than the others. But the way you tell if your rolls are ready to be baked or not, and this applies to quite literally any other bread that you're making, is that you take your finger and gently, not too harsh, but gently press on your dough. You see, my dough springs back, but it leaves a very slight indentation still. So it doesn't fully spring back. It takes its time to spring back, but it does spring back. So if for any reason, if I push this and it didn't spring back at all, that means it's overproofed. Or if it sprung back too quickly without leaving any indentation, that means that it's not proofed enough. That's what you're looking for. So our cinnamon rolls are ready to be baked. I have got my oven preheating at 180 degrees Celsius, and I'm just gonna quickly egg wash these and ready to put them in the oven. So I'm just gonna egg wash my buns. One of my favorite bits is to take some demerara sugar, sprinkle it on top, and this helps to give a really nice crunchy caramelly sort of texture and flavor. This looks amazing. I honestly can't wait to eat this. So let's put these bad boys in the oven at 180 degrees Celsius. We're gonna start with 20 minutes and add more if you need to. They take anywhere between 20 to roughly 35 minutes depending on your oven. So start with 20 and then add more if you need to. It's been 35 minutes and our cinnamon rolls are out of the oven. That smells incredible. Only if you were in my kitchen right now and you can smell this, because my entire apartment, which let's be honest is not that big, but still my entire apartment smells like cinnamon and butter at the moment, which is the best smell ever. So I am so excited to dig into this, but I do have to let this cool down just a teeny tiny bit. But oh my god, look at how beautiful they look. This is so, ouch, that's a bit hot. So just to cool down a little bit faster, I am going to take this paper off and put it on this cooling rack just so it speeds up our process. So be a bit careful, put it on here and let that cool down. Roughly 10 to 15 minutes. You do want to eat them when they're still a bit warm, but just not this hot. Okay, this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Okay, let's do the pull apart test. That's the real test, right? Oh my god, look at how fluffy that is. Oh, that is amazing. Anyway, before we actually dig into our cinnamon roll, we've got to have the full effect, right? So here's just a little bit of orange ganache that I made earlier on. It's really simple. It's just white chocolate, cream, orange zest, and a little bit of vanilla. You can find the full recipe on my website at www.miamispatula.com. I will leave a link in the description box, you know where to look. So really simple, just an orange vanilla ganache almost that we're going to use as a drizzle. I'm not a big sugar drizzle fan, so this is my preferred choice of poison, and it is delicious. Okay, so how do we do this? Okay, let's grab a plate. Let's be civil about it. And let's pull apart one here. Oh my god, would you look at that? I am so excited to dig into this. You know what, I can be civil about this, but I'm not gonna. So let's just dig in as is. Nice and sticky. This is so delicious. You have to give this recipe a try. I'm not even kidding. I mean, that cozy cinnamon butter that's paired beautifully with the fluffy bread, and then you've got yourself a nice thingy Swedish drizzle to go with it. The whole combination is so beautiful and it's so comforting to actually eat. This is so tasty. I'm gonna go sit down and actually eat this properly. Which you need to click that link in my description box and head straight to the recipe and make these amazing cinnamon rolls today. Honestly, there's no excuse. If you did enjoy this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any of these videos and you do get notified every single week. That's it. That was it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'm going to see you next week with another delicious recipe coming your way. But until then, happy baking. Bye!